In 1975, the United Nations passed one of its most infamous resolutions, equating Zionism with racism. Now, recently, I watched a clip of Ilan Pappé defending that vote, saying it wasn't anti Semitic. It was a moral act by the decolonized nations trying to make the world a better place. So let's take a look at what he says, and then I'm going to explain why the claim falls apart the moment you examine who actually voted for it and why.
In Palestine and for those who were expelled from there. 4. In 1975, a vast majority of the United Nations member states defined Zionism as a form of racism and racial discrimination. It was passed with the same majority that passed the 1947 resolution recognizing Israel. The difference was that in 1947, the colonized world was not represented in the United Nations. In 1975, it was. But it was still trying to find its way in the post-colonial world. The Third World's discourse equated Zionism with continued colonialism. Alas, neoliberalism, corruption, and post-colonial political system, corruption in the post-colonial political system, and aggressive American imperialism have casted to the sideways of history this impulse and energy. But at its height and within it, anti-Zionism was part of the wish of the colonized people to build a better and more just world. Again,
Yeah. Okay, so there you have it. Let's break this down. First, let's define Zionism as Israelis and actual Zionists understand it. Simply put, it is the national movement of the Jewish people, no different from Turkish nationalism, Han Chinese nationalism, or Hindu nationalism in India. So, if you're going to claim that Jewish self determination is racist, then logically you would have to apply that idea, the same standard, to nearly every country in the Middle East, Africa, Asia, and the world. Right? You can't just say one form of nationalism, ethno nationalism, is racist, while the rest of the world's ethno nationalisms are not. And spoiler alert, none of the countries that supported the 1975 resolution have actually done that, right? Only Jewish nationalism, Zionism, is labeled as uniquely evil, uniquely discriminatory, uniquely unjust. And here's the irony: the so called anti Zionist movement in the Third World was rising during the era of Arab nationalism, which is just one form of ethnic nationalism opposing another, right? It's the Arab version of Zionism. So, how is it that Zionism is labeled an inherently discriminatory ethnic nationalist movement, but Arab nationalism is not? Right? Are we really supposed to believe that Arab states are, or any of those so-called anti-colonial nations, that they're not discriminatory against ethnic or religious lines? Right? That they don't have ethnic hierarchies or religious hierarchies in their society? It's only Zionism does that? Well, let's analyze the record. Let's look at Iran. The Baha'i faith, a minority in Iran, aren't even recognized as a legitimate religious minority. They are literally banned from universities and considered a political cult, according to their government. Is that not apartheid? Where's the outcry from the third world? What about Egypt? Coptic Christians are treated essentially like second class citizens, like they've always been. For example, to build or even renovate a church, you need special permission from the president, a restriction that doesn't apply to mosques. That is alone blatant discriminatory and reflective of the society at large. And beyond the legal barriers, cops are, they regularly face mob violence. They get no protection from the police, and in many cases, if the authorities do come, they come late. They do nothing, or they pressure the victims into some sort of reconciliation. So cops are not happy in Egypt, and Arab Muslims are at the top of the hierarchy there. Now we can go to India. It's literally a caste system that shapes the social life on virtually every single level, right? And Muslims, not to mention, face a routine discrimination and violence in India. At the time, let's talk about Sudan. At the time, in the 70s, an Arab elite ruled over Black Africans. Okay, and that led to a genocide in Darfur. That led to an actual genocide. We can keep going. Iraq, the Arab Ba'ath Party, right? The Ba'ath people under Saddam Hussein, they brutally suppressed the Kurds and the Shia populations. Now, I would just like to know, can someone explain to me how these regimes, virtually all engaged in outright oppression or ethnic hierarchy, aka apartheid, are the moral voices standing up for global justice. These are the nations trying to make the world a better place. It's pure lunacy. They weren't fighting for equality. They were deeply racial, religious, and hierarchical societies. Okay, so that is clearly not what they were fighting for. Because if they were, why don't they do it for themselves? Like, why go after Israel and Zionism and that ethnic hierarchy to the extent that it exists, and not focus on your own? If you really wanted to make the world a better place, why don't you start with your own country first? I mean, even today they haven't done that. It's like 50 years later, and they still massive levels of discrimination. So that to me is very suspicious. And what's even more wild is that Arab citizens in Israel today and at the time have more rights, freedoms, and protections than the minorities in any of those countries. And it's not even close. And yes, even now. So it's yeah, that's just a ridiculous argument in my opinion. But we can go even deeper than that, which is, to me, it reflects really what's happening. Because then the question is, well, why did they really vote for it? Is it just pure anti-Semitism? To an extent, yes. But it was also geopolitical strategy, right? The 1975 Zionism is Racism was resolution was a Soviet-backed campaign during the Cold War. It was a calculated attempt supported by the Arab League to isolate Israel and paint Jewish self-determination as, as evil. Why? Because Israel was aligned with the US and the West in general, politically, militarily, to an extent ideologically. And what were the Soviets trying to do? They were trying to build a third world alliance against the West. Pretty simple. I mean, this resolution was just diplomatic propaganda, right? It was international propaganda meant to pull post colonial nations into the Soviet orbit. Remember, this was this is about 8 years after the 1967 war, which is in its own way, a Cold War proxy conflict in which the Soviet-backed, Egyptians and Syrians were humiliated by Israel, U.S.-backed, in 6 days, right? And after that, these regimes realized that, hey, you know what, military confrontation is probably not going to work. So let's shift strategies. Let's isolate Israel diplomatically through the UN and, this anti-racist rhetoric. And it was a pretty brilliant geopolitical move that where the Soviets gained, new allies in the third world. It undermined US moral credibility. It turned the UN into a propaganda weapon. So, you know, to believe that this is a purely noble moral stand rather than a cynical Cold War calculation is, naive at best and at worst, intentional malicious propaganda. Ilan Pappé is, to me, a master at speaking to relatively uninformed audiences, wrapping his arguments in seductive, ideologically utopian frameworks that I consider just pure manipulation. I don't know if he's intentionally doing it or if he's truly naive, but the reality is this planet is not a utopia, okay? And whether you're on the left or right or in between, the truth is what it is, independent of how we feel about it or our ideological frameworks. What happened is what happened. And but hey, yeah, that's my take. What do you think? Was this a bad faith manipulative argument, or is Elon Pape just naive? Or am I wrong? I don't know. Push back. Feel free. In any case, let me know in the comments if you found this useful. Please like and subscribe to the channel, and yeah, see you in the next one.